Urban Sprawl by GMT. This is a game where the players act as investors and politicians. They will spend money to build buildings. Those buildings will generate more money and the players will reinvest that money to build more buildings. So this clearly is a Euro game, and you know that I do not play many Euro games usually. Still, this one had so much buzz about it that I really became curious about this game. Also, the designer of this game has designed some remarkable war games in the past, so that gives me some hope, reassures me somehow. So I played this game, and today I'm going to film one of my reviews out of my comfort zone. Bear with me and let's see what happens. This is a general overview of the very nice looking mountain board and of the play area in general. Here you have some money. The players will receive money at the beginning of the game. A row of planning cards that will give the players the permits that they need to build their buildings. Here you have the cards that will represent the buildings. At the beginning of the game, those cards all come from the town deck. Later you will also have cards from the city deck and the metropolis deck. Tiles representing political positions that will become available during the game, a dial that will indicate the elections when an election takes place to assign one of the political positions. Tiles representing the buildings that will be built on the board. Markers that will indicate an increase in value in certain areas of the board. And then, of course, you have the board itself. This is the area where the buildings will be built, and these buildings are there at setup. And then you also have vocation markers that indicate different types of investments in which the players may choose to specialize during the game. At the beginning of the game, each player receives a number of build permits. At the beginning of his turn, the active player can discard one or more build permit cards to receive the printed amount of wealth. I could discard this card here and receive 10 wealth from the bank. Then the active player receives 6 action points that can be used to purchase permit cards from this row here and or building cards from another row that I'll show you later. The cost to purchase each card is printed to the right of the card itself. 1 action point, 2 action points. This is the area of the board where you place the cards representing the buildings that are going to be built. And this area works exactly like the other one with printed costs for each card. Slots that are left empty on this row will be refilled with cards from the town deck in the early phases of the game. There is a card in the town deck that will instruct you to start using the city deck, and then the city deck will refill these slots here, and the town deck only that one. In the city deck, there is a card that instructs you to start using the metropolis deck. At that point, the metropolis deck will provide you with most of the cards, and the city deck will only refill that slot, and the town deck that slot. In the Metropolis deck, there is also a card that will end the game. When that card is revealed, the game is over immediately. You count victory points and you determine the winner. There are 4 types of building in the game: civic, commercial, industrial, and residential. There is also a special type of construction, the park. After the active player has collected permits and building cards, he can start building buildings on the board. To add a new building to the board, you need to use the corresponding building card, and you also need to discard permits that match the icon of the building itself and that have a number of contracts equal to or higher than the contracts necessary to build that building. For example, in this case 2, and commercial icon discard is good. I have enough permits to build a motel, and buildings have a number of contracts that can go from 1 to 4. The number of contracts also indicates the size of the building. In fact, you have 4 sizes: 1 contract, 2 contracts, 3 contracts, and 4 contracts. See, it is also the number of squares that the building will cover. So the motel is a 2 square, 2 contract building. When you add a new building to the board, it has to be within the limits of each lot. You could not build like that. A new building can be added adjacent to no other buildings. That is always legal. And all squares that are around a building count as adjacent to it, including the corners. So this would be a legal placement. If you want to add your new building adjacent to a building of a different color, in that case, for example, that building is adjacent to blue, you need the new building to also be adjacent to a building of the same color. For example, that would be a legal placement because there is a blue, yes, but my building is also touching another yellow building. This would be another legal because of that yellow building, but this would not be a legal placement. And when you place a new building on the board, you add a cube of your color to indicate that that building is yours. At the beginning of the game, the players also claim all the initial buildings on the board, but you also have to pay for the new building, hello, and you will have to pay a total amount of wealth equal to the numbers on all rows that apply to the space where your new building is. In the case, for example, at the beginning of the game, I would only have to pay 6, 1, and 5, but during the game, certain game effects will allow players to add these extra markers on these areas here, and those markers increase the cost and the value of certain areas. In this case, for example, now if I want to build there, I have to pay 1, and 5 is 6, and 7, 13. When you add new buildings to the board, you may also receive victory points thanks to the neighborhood bonus, which encourages you to place new buildings adjacent to buildings of the same color, and you receive 1 victory point for each such building. The pink player, for example, just placed that yellow building there. It is adjacent to 1 building of the same color, 1 victory point for the pink player thanks to the neighborhood bonus, but then the white player adds that building there, and that is adjacent to 3 yellow buildings, and that will earn him 3 victory points. When you build a new building, usually you also receive other advantages. First, you resolve the text that is printed on the card, and if there is a symbol like this, you receive the corresponding vocation marker, and then you receive that amount of resources printed to the right of the symbol for each such marker. So this is the first one, you get 1. That can be wealth or victory points, you choose. But every player that has these markers will receive that amount for each marker that they have. So this may also help other players. And when a player has finished building buildings for that turn, that kind of completes his turn. But I say kind of because there's still things that are going to happen. First, you refill the pyramid area by sliding cards down and drawing new cards. There will always be a card face up on the deck itself. For each card that you reveal, you look at the bottom of the card, and that number indicates the row that will pay out at that time. For example, now row number 4 will pay out. At that point, you look at this payout table on your player aid, and you see the row number 4 will pay for wealth to the player that owns the majority of buildings on that block, on that row, and then 2 wealth for the second player, 1 to the third, and 0. In this case, for example, on this row here, row 4, the pink player has 2 buildings, the white player has 3 buildings, so the white player receives 4 wealth, and the pink player 2. When you are refilling the pyramid draw, for each card like this that is revealed, you will move this pawn by 1 space on this diagram, and this will indicate the type of election that takes place to assign a political role. At the beginning of the game, only the mayor is active, so you treat all of these other spaces as blank, but next time that pawn hits the election for the mayor, then you look at the tile of the mayor and you see what the condition is to become the new mayor. For example, the mayor becomes, the player that becomes the mayor is the one with the most vocations, that are those small markers that I showed you earlier. And if you're the mayor, you can place a 1-lot park into any vacant lot and take control of it, which is pretty sweet. This is the park. As soon as you start playing using the city deck, you will assign all the remaining roles. Then each time that the marker moves to a new space, you will have to check for that role if the player that owns it still has the right to own it, or if the role changes and goes to another player. And you will give the district attorney role to the player with the most valuable civic building, and that will give him double points when he's placing down new buildings. The treasurer receives 2 wealth from the other players at the beginning of his turn, and the treasurer is the player with the most valuable commercial building. Police chief, the player with the most valuable residential building, and he can gain both wealth and prestige victory points when scoring for a vocation. And union boss. The union boss is the player with the most valuable industrial building, and the union boss receives 8 action points to spend instead of 6. When the Olympic Games event is revealed from the Metropolis deck, the game is over immediately. You score each prestige row 1 final time. These are the rows with the red numbers. Players gain 1 prestige/victory point for each 10 wealth that they have, and players gain an end of game bonuses for their politicians. Yes, politicians have an end of game special bonus that they can give. For example, the district attorney makes you gain 1 point for each civic building in play, treasurer 1 for each commercial, police chief 1 for each residential. These can be huge amounts of points that you get towards the end of the game. You add together all the points that you gained through this procedure, then you also add the points that you gained early in the game, and at that point the player with the highest total amount of points is the winner. I don't play many Euro games and I fall in love with even less, but I am in love with this game. I could not believe how much fun I was having playing it. I was like, I'm just spending money and building buildings. This is the type of stuff that I do not enjoy very much in games. And yet this game was drawing me, and I really enjoyed playing it. Maybe it is because of the high interaction. I really love that in games. Maybe it is because you always have to be very aware of what the other players are doing to influence that, to prevent them from influencing you negatively. Of course, all the good things are relative. It is about getting the most expensive building, or about getting the highest concentration of buildings in a certain area. So there is an evolving situation during gameplay that you really have to take into account. I like the fact that the game relies on a core of very straightforward rules, and yet it has so much complexity that comes from all the other factors, from the continuously changing resources that are available to you in terms of permits and in terms of buildings. The vocations add another level of complexity. The spatial organization of the board, I love that almost statical aspect. You are about occupying certain positions. The politicians are huge, and they really add, again, more complexity and more challenges, opportunities, things that you have to protect yourself against, opportunities they're trying to grab. Something that I love immensely is the fact that you have so many building cards with different individual abilities and advantages, and you will not use all of them in a game. In each game, usually you use around like half of those, and that is great because it prevents you from becoming too in love with any single strategy based on this or that card, because you do not even know if that card will be in play at all. And this, of course, adds even more to the replay value. One thing for me is that this game is a little bit of a brain burner. It is not too much of a problem, really, but you definitely can smell the overeating from the brains of the players as those brains are working at higher speed than usual, and at the end players may be almost exhausted. But I've seen players being exhausted after playing this, but everybody was happy. And even though this is a brain burner, this does require concentration and energy and involvement. It is a great investment because it is fun and rewarding in the end. Bottom line, This is a game that shines for its variety, richness, depth, and replay value. It is definitely one of the best Euro games that I've played in a very long time, and if I say like this, I do not know how much it really matters because I must have played 4 or 5 Euro games this year, but let's say it differently. This is a game that gets big thumbs up from a non-Eurogamer. It totally convinced me. It totally made me fall in love with it, and maybe this has more meaning.